Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Feeling and Healing podcast. I am Danielle Z, your host, MFT in the making, motivator, and mental health maven. And today I'm so happy to welcome Tiff Thompson, or Dr. Tiff Thompson, I should say. She is also a fellow therapist. She is distinguished clinical neuroscientist. She's the CEO and founder of NeuroField, Neurotherapy, which is a cutting edge neurotherapy clinic in Santa Barbara, California. So welcome, Tiff. I'm so happy to have.
Thanks. Yeah, lovely. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and I will say your name, it has such like it's such like a, I guess like a very like marketable name. I love it. Like Tiff Thompson. It's like two T's, and it's like it just rolls off the tongue really well. So kudos to you for having a great,
Yeah.
a great name.
Yeah. Thank you. I ditched the long form. I ditched Tiffany like 20
Yeah.
some years ago.
I
I was
like
like,
it.
nah.
I
Yeah.
like the I
Yeah.
like the short. It's good. I like it. So I guess for all of the listeners and also for me too, because I'm, new to this kind of model of therapy, could you just explain what neurotherapy is? And of course, because you started a whole business and your whole clinic around it, so you're the expert. So go take it away, explain what that is for everybody.
Yeah, it's a good question for anybody who's in mental health to know the answer
Mhm.
to, at least in a very
Yeah.
general sense. And so neurotherapy is an umbrella term, and
Okay.
it encompasses other modalities of neuromodulation like neurofeedback. That's one that most people know about, but one that a lot of people don't know about is different forms of brain stimulation. So
Mm.
multimodal neurostimulation. And that really is, the center of my expertise, at least in terms of application. That's the modality that I use foremost to treat patients, right? And
Okay.
so this is a way to address first to see what's going on in the brain itself, in the behavior of the brain, in the electrical chemical potentials of the brain.
Mhm.
Right? So it's an analysis process, but then B, it's a way to address the physiology underneath the psychology, right? So you have patients that come in and they have, OCD tendencies, or they have ADHD tendencies, or they have symptoms of anxiety. And these different symptom clusters have different profiles. And so this is a way to understand why the individual is feeling, how they're feeling, what their unique profile looks like. And then from that, there's a customization of a protocol, and it
Mhm.
could be neurofeedback or it could be neurostimulation. Again, I prefer the latter, but both are available. A customization of a protocol to address the individual's brain in front of you. So it's a nice complement to psychotherapy.
Cool. And could you, for like me, I will say this is like I'm very new to this. And also too, I'm sure, as you know, being a clinician, well, I mean, maybe not as you know, because you kind of dove right into the brain and the neuroscience behind it. As a potential mental health professional in training, we actually don't get a lot of, I'm so surprised, a lot of education around brain function. I mean, very high level, but everything I'm learning in school to be a therapist right now, and mind you, I know I'm going to a totally different model of therapy for marriage and family therapy. We don't learn like anything about the brain.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
there's like no courses on the brain or anything, which I'm surprised.
well, and I have to say, I'm a marriage and family therapist as well, and my education was in depth models. So psychodynamic
Yes.
psychotherapy was what I had a lot of education on. So all of my education, I have some certifications in EEG, and I have some medical credentialing in EEG, which is brain waves, right? Which is
Yeah.
electroencephalography. But let me say this much about it. I think, like anything that we do in life, anything that
Mhm.
we study, anything that we pursue, if you pour yourself into it, so let's say you're a therapist and you just love neuroscience, you just eat it up, well, then it will stick, right? You're going to
Yes.
retain it. But if you're in your graduate program and you take a course, one course during a semester on neuroscience, you remember it for the test. You're going to remember it for
Absolutely.
the
Yes. Yeah.
quizzes, right? But
Yeah.
it's okay that, we don't all have all the things we've ever learned in our mind. And so, that sometimes neuroscience can be lacking in mental health education. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that's something that I personally, because like I really want to learn about, because I recognize, right, like we have this brain in this body that's controlling our lives and our human experience. So I
Yeah.
want to know how like things work under the hood. So like last year, my whole thing was like I bought all these books on the brain, like like because in my free time, why not study more, study mental health because I'm not studying it, studying it enough. And then this year, I feel like I'm getting more into like nervous system regulation and learning more about like the vagus nerve and all the different aspects of that. So I just find it
Hmm.
fascinating because as you mentioned, like this is a physiological relationship, right? Like our mental health, mind, body, that it's very real.
Yeah. I mean, you're even in talking about the vagus nerve, that's the 10th cranial nerve, right? It's this large,
Hmm.
chunky thing.
Yes, yes,
And that's absolutely nervous system. So this is a system, we're talking about the same system. We're talking about the nervous system, right? And so,
exactly, exactly.
I can't resist. This is a little bit cheesy, but this modality of neurotherapy is
Hmm.
one that I love so much that I built a school around it. I decided to
Yeah.
to start up the School of Neurotherapy because when I got into the field, which was what, 2011, I had a really hard time. I had to like bushwhack my way through the field. It was really a
Hmm.
hard field to get up and running in. And it's a dense field. It's a complex field. It is a PhD in and of itself. And the more you know, the more you know you don't know. And that's the nature of the
Yeah,
beast of
yeah,
the
yeah,
brain,
right.
right? So the whole objective in setting up this school was to make this available, this information, this kind of education, this application available to anybody who wants to learn how to do it, right? It's who
Hmm.
wants to get certified in brain mapping, right? So we offer a
Hmm.
certification course in brain mapping, which is a quantitative EEG diplomacy. Who wants to get certified in neurotherapy? So we have a
Hmm.
certification course in neurotherapy. Now, we are not the credentialing body. We are a course provider, for
Yes,
this, but
yes.
it's something where I think it's a beautiful complement to any mental health care practitioner's practice,
Yeah.
because it's addressing the hardware, right? What we do all
Hmm.
day in psychotherapy is we
Yeah.
address the software, right?
Yeah, I love that metaphor you just used, the hardware and the software. Yeah, I love that.
Right. Yeah, right. And so the mind and the brain are inextricably linked. These two things go together. And you will have people who walk into your practice who have really challenging symptoms. You're going
Hmm.
to have that panic disorder case. You can't psychotherapize them out of their panic. You're going to have that
Yeah, you
ADHD
can't
kid.
talk your way out of it.
You
Yeah.
can't, yeah, psychotherapize that kid out of being, spacey. And so this stuff is a good application for the really, really tough cases. That's where neurotherapy really shines, right? Is for the
Hmm.
most challenging, the weirdest stuff, the trichotillomania, the tics,
Hmm.
right? That's where this modality really shines.
Yeah, because I guess you're working, and please tell me, because Joe, you're not the only person. I'm really interested in this like brain spotting because I've heard about it. I've never done it
Mm.
before, and I'm
Mhm.
not certified in it or anything. And how is it different, I guess, from like I know it's similar to like EDMR, like very
Mhm.
like what's the
EMDR.
difference? EMDR, excuse me. I'm sorry, I had a brain moment.
That's
Yeah,
okay. Just
EMDR.
switch those two, a little bit
I
of
know, right? I'm
little,
like,
yeah, little
so
dyslexic
many
moment.
acronyms they have to in the mental health world, like LPC, LMFT, all
Yeah.
these things. I'm like, what's another acronym, right?
So EMDR is eye movement and desensitization reprocessing, and this is how it works. And then I'll talk about brain spotting, which I don't know as much about, and I do neither of these things in a traditional sense, at least. But so with
That's okay.
EMDR, right? You're looking left and right, and your
Hmm.
eyeballs are actually they're part of the vestibular system, number one. But number two, they are dipoles. And what a dipole is it's a thing with a positive and a negative polarity, like a battery with its negative and positive ends. That's a dipole. So imagine that for your eyeballs, you had two batteries, and the plus was at the front and the minus was at the back of the eyeball. So when you look left and right, what you're actually doing is you're causing a large sweep of electrical energy across the orbital frontal part of the brain, right behind the eyeballs, this Brodmann area 11. It's absolutely fundamental in early life attachment.
Oh,
It's
wow.
the affective region of the brain in terms of emotional processing, emotional regulation, the mentation of emotion, how I think about how I feel. So when you're looking left and right, and you're moving through an old trauma, an old traumatic memory, you are effectively altering the patterning that your system does when it retrieves that memory. So in a weird way, it's kind of like a release of a quarantine, right? So
Oh,
that's how and why EMDR works as well as it does.
got it.
Now, brain spotting, my understanding is when somebody starts to like really get stuck in a trauma in EMDR, their eyes will get fixed at a certain spot. And then brain spotting is a little bit more specific about how to use the more acute moments of the reprocessing of trauma. And that again, I can't speak about it greatly because I've never done it.
No,
But
yeah,
in
no worries. I figured I'd ask you like the more of a brain expert than me because it for me, I was like, I think I talked to somebody about brain spotting in a previous podcast episode, and I was just curious about it because it's like I've been hearing more about it.
yeah. Well, what's interesting about EMDR and this modality is it's one of the things that I do actually do with neurostimulation. But if you think about this, right? So like if you go back and forth like that, that's
Hmm.
roughly a 1 second waveform, which is about 1 hertz, right? We have about 1 hertz. If I go like this, now we have a 2 hertz wave, right? And
Hmm.
so I work with a whole host of different forms of stimulation. When I say multimodal, that implies direct current stimulation, alternating current stimulation, something called pink noise stimulation, brown noise stimulation, inaudible, and then some other forms. But I say this to say 1, 2 hertz. Now we're talking about frequency, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about we're talking about delta.
Hmm.
And so you're stimulating somebody within the delta range. So we can mimic with stimulation what the eyeballs do in EMDR, right? And we can
Yeah.
essentially move them past the point of their eyes sticking. And so it's just another way of, skinning the cat. It's just another way of doing something that's, was brilliantly discovered by Dr. Shapiro so long ago, you know.
Yeah. And I
hmm
guess for those out there listening, because from what I understand and what you're telling me is it's a very neurotherapy is a really great complement to psychotherapy. But is this only for people that have, as you mentioned, kind of those more severe symptoms like tics or or can anybody really who is even just wants to kind of maybe create new neural pathways in their brain, can they do neurotherapy too? Like, is it,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean it's so there's clinics that have, peak performance models and peak performance.
Okay,
They advertise and market to a peak performance demographic. And
got it.
so that would be I want to amplify my meditative practice, right? Or
Hmm.
I really want to perfect my golf swing, or I really want to become, have a faster reaction time because I'm a race car driver. So there's absolutely that demographic of high performers. And then there's also kind of like your run-of-the-mill, John Doe with a little bit of stress and anxiety, or,
Hmm.
this one that has found himself addicted to vapes and he wants to quit
Hmm.
vaping, right? So there's lots of applications of neurostimulation. Um, yeah, for all the way from, optimization of the human to, really addressing some severe deficits. But at the
Hmm.
end of the day, it's interesting. If somebody came to me and they said, I really want some peak performance training, I really would like for you to speed me up. And I look at their data and I see that, we have a focal slow transient, let's just say. So what you could think of when you see that is just a little wavelet that runs by on one of the temples, then I would go to that. So peak performance or not, what I'm going to do, what somebody who does what I do is going to do, if they're good, is they're going to look at the individual in front of them and they're going to mold exactly what that brain needs to
Hmm.
go to the next level, to go where it
Yeah.
needs to go,
Hmm.
you know?
Very
Yeah.
cool.
It's very cool. And then what
Yeah.
what we can do thereafter, is we can quantify all along,
Okay.
right? So you start out with a quantification. You start out with a computational neuroanalysis, right? So you take the
Got
individual's brain waves, which is their EEG, and you take something called an ERP,
it.
which is
Okay.
watching how the brain responds to a task. And there's an analysis process, right? And I'll spare you the details on that because it's detaily. Uh, from
All good.
that, from that, you decide what to do. And then after you do what you decided to do for about 10 sessions, you will get another set of data, right? And the new set
Okay.
of data is going to give you a pre-post analysis of how that person has varied, how they have improved. And so you can track, right? The different metrics, the percentage of decrease or increase or whatever it is that you're working on, right? How much faster are they in their response time? How much more synchronized is their response? Um, how have their phase dynamics improved, right? So like all these little ways that we can actually quantify the human and evidence back to our clients how they're improving,
Hmm.
right? As opposed to just like you feel better, right? Like it's opposed to just a sort of a subjective assessment. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's challenging with psychotherapy. And, a lot of folks will have clients that stick around for a long time and they may improve. They may come in with X issue
Hmm.
and then they, that gets better, but now they have the next one, right? And so
Yeah.
we as a species, I think, are accustomed to, moving on to the next problem when it arrives in a good way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do they
We
say? It's either you're getting over a problem or like anticipating the next one. Like it's like that's life, right?
Right, right. And so this way you can evidence, okay, X problem has been put to bed. We can see that here in this, this data that you're
Mhm.
showing us. And so it's satisfying. It's a satisfying field.
Well, it feels like it's very well, first of all, it's evidence-based and very like data-driven. So anytime anything is data-driven, I feel like, it's very validating because you have concrete evidence of what's going on.
Right,
Which, and
right.
I will
Yeah.
say, in the talk therapy, in the psychotherapy world, I mean, there's a lot of theories, a lot of hypotheses that people come up with that you could be circling, like to your point, you could be circling around forever. Not forever, but I mean, I
Well,
personally feel like,
sure. In psychodynamic theory and psychoanalysis, yeah, it could be like a decade, right, or two.
yeah.
Like you could do it forever. Yeah, but I want to say that like now we're talking about humanism.
Mm.
And I just I love humanism. I love being a humanist. I love the poetry. I love the viscerality of emotion, right? Like I love to feel with the people that are sitting in front of me. Like it's
Yeah,
such a gift. It's such a
it
gift. It's
is.
such an
It really is.
honor to
It
sit,
is.
right? And
Yep.
experience people. And so, this quantification piece it's great. It's really satisfying for A types. But it marries. The mind and the
Mhm.
brain marry, right? And so we're not throwing away, the heart in this
Yes,
work.
yes,
This is
yes.
actually the bridge, right?
Yeah.
That crosses the divide between psychology and neurology, between psychology
Mhm.
and neuroscience, and all of us, I mean, probably you included think that, of course, these two things go hand in hand,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
what
yeah.
you'll find is that these two fields are star-crossed lovers,
Hmm.
right? And that the clinicians, very often particularly, psychodynamic clinicians aren't so interested in, the hard science behind neuroanalysis and brain science and that kind of thing, right? They're more interested in the emotional aspects of things and vice versa. Although that's changing, I think consciousness is becoming a lot more academically worthy as a topic,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean, I would say I hope that I recognize the bridge, even just like in my personal life and like that, as you said, like there's the hardware and there's the software, and you have to know both in order to be to work with somebody and whatever that person believes or whatnot. I feel personally that, it is a like it like similar like to like the mind body relationship, you know what I mean, the physiological, like everything is both, and
Mm-hmm.
one's not more
Mm-hmm.
important than the other. Like I always say, listen to your body to people, but then also too I realize like I have this thing in my head that is controlling a lot of my bodily function, so I have to recognize that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
not just okay, listen to my body and whatever my nervous system. I also recognize too that like I'll just use a perfect example is like, I know logically that my brain isn't sophisticated enough to know that like when I go in that, that activated state, that fight or flight, like either a notification from my phone or a real sense of danger could activate that. Like I logically know that, but my body doesn't. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
my either
Mm-hmm.
way, if I get into a car accident or I get a text, I'm gonna maybe get activated, and that's just my
Mm-hmm.
body going. learning off of patterns that's been, introduced into my life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's the case with all of us. And so, patterns are interesting from from an in-depth psychological perspective. I mean, that's a lot of how I look at individuals' goings on, right? Is okay,
Hmm.
so interesting, this pattern, right? Again, so like
Yep.
what's the meaning, what's the message? But what's maybe more interesting, arguably more interesting, is that we actually, in terms of the hardware, again, that there's paths of least resistance that we form. So,
Yeah.
so you, Danielle, right, you have your own way of experiencing stress. And I don't know much about you, but let's just say that, you grew up in a stressful environment and you always feel a certain sense of distress, little anxiety or something. Well,
Hmm.
that anxiety will have a pattern that will be, I don't want to say unique to you because there aren't like an infinite number of patterns, but it will have a pattern that is that well-worn pathway that your system knows how to do.
Hmm.
So you get a text from that person that, makes your blood pressure rise and your in your brain. So your body will do something, absolutely, but your brain will do something as well, and it will run down that well-worn path, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where this gets interesting. Is it's those patterns, it's those paths that we're seeking to A, disrupt, right? With
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
neurostimulation stuff, and B, supplant with a new way of being. And so that's one of the things that over the past 15 years I've learned, and I teach now, which is okay, so person is showing X pattern, right? With all these accoutrements. What does that pattern want? Let's say that they have ADHD. What does that ADHD pattern want in order to feel focused? Like, what do we need to break it down? Does it need to be broken down? Is it showing a real indication that it will be a very resistant pattern? If it is, then we're going to do certain things to address it. And then B, what does that particular pattern need to be supplanted with, right? In order
Hmm.
to reprogram, which is not a word I like to use too much, but in order to reprogram
Yeah.
that individual's experience, right? And,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I know
mhm,
from the little I know about the brain, but just like neuroplasticity, right? It's like, as you
mhm,
mentioned, our neural pathways, they sometimes are so, they're our default. And what you're doing is taking that default, whatever said mechanism and flipping it on its head and being like, nope, but there's a different way to, get through said experience or react
mhm.
to said experience. And I love that because it shows like, I know there's that's why I feel just on the from a very this is not as deep as the work that you do with your clients, but that's why I feel like even reframing, I know like CBT and DBT, like just manifestation and like simple mindset things are so powerful to rewire your brain, you know.
Totally.
I
Yeah.
mean,
The
you
mind
do a
creates
lot,
the
what
brain
you
and the
do is
brain
a
creates the
lot
mind.
deeper, and symptom related. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't want you to go to the nuances of, you know, like an analysis, but I'm sure that's why I think the work you do is so powerful because you can see it on that like kind of higher level of, just mindset work. I can
Sure.
only imagine what your work does to people's brains.
Well, I mean, but you're actually pointing to something that's really more powerful than any of the work that I do, which is that humans' inherent potential, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm not under any illusion that this work that I'm doing is something that can only be achieved with a machine. Now, in
Mm.
saying that, what I will say is it is a very high level human, right, that can find their way out of the traps that we get ourselves into. But I actually believe that our species has infinite potential. I really, really do.
Yeah, so do I.
Um, right. And so because the mind and the brain are tied together, that means that your mind and what you're spending your time thinking about is hugely powerful in actually shifting your brain. Now it's harder, right? It's harder to do that sometimes than this level of work that I do, by using brain stimulation to change the pattern. But our emotions are really fundamentally a barometer that will
Hmm.
let us know how aligned with our desired reality are we in this moment, right? So you're having a
Hmm.
negative emotion, you're having some fear or some worry or some, and so it's just a little indication that you can sort of, oh, this isn't really what I want in this moment, and we can sort of veer ourselves back into the right path. So I think psychology is no less important, right, than neuro anything, neurology,
Yeah.
neurotherapy, any of it.
Yeah, no, and I love that you brought up the concept of like emotions. I always tell people that like emotions aren't bad because I feel like we live in this society. I mean, maybe not you and I because we're in mental health and we're very connected to our emotional selves and our, that part of our brains. But like there's emotions are signals. They're not bad, they're not good. They're there to give you some information about an experience you're having.
Mm,
So
mm,
and I think we live in a society that's like, oh, like you're too emotional. You're not expressing your emotions enough. And I don't
mm,
know what your stance is on. I mean, because I know generationally there's that, older
mm-hmm,
generations didn't have the resources and, they were like, just get over it and suppress your emotions. But now
mm-hmm,
I'm finding the younger generations are really in touch with their feelings, which I think is refreshing, but I also do think there needs to be like, a balance, right? Like, like
mm-hmm,
of course, like I not
mm-hmm.
I'm not demeaning anybody's experiences or not seeing them, but the word I think, and I'm just thinking of this because I'm taking a class about trauma right now, and it's like we talked about like, big T and little T. And we all have different definitions of that. And I think somebody was telling me yesterday that one of her nieces was like at like a FedEx or like a UPS store, and like she said like the wait in the line was traumatic. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I would use that term for trauma, but like I find like we're like, oh, not sensitive enough or oversensitive, and I think we need to do a
Mm,
little bit better job of
mm-hmm,
finding that middle ground these days because
mm-hmm.
the pendulum will always swing either way.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about relativity,
Yeah.
and I mean, thank God for that. And even within oneself, so for instance, interestingly, yesterday was my birthday, but yesterday was
Oh, happy
also a
birthday.
very, thank you. But what's interesting about that is that it was an actually like a really emotional day. Not because it was my
Oh.
birthday, I don't think, although unconsciously perhaps, but I
Yeah.
found myself to be really weepy yesterday.
Oh.
And yeah, and I thought, oh my God, I mean, how wonderful to just feel the intensity of
Hmm.
emotion. It wasn't like I'm sad.
Yeah.
It was just the movement of my own energy in the day. And so, I for one think it's really a gift to be able
Yeah.
to feel, all the feels. And it becomes an issue if the emotional lability is such that it's affecting your function. Like if you cannot
Yeah.
function because you
Exactly.
swing too wildly, then we have something at hand. But, what a gift to be able to feel feelings. And some people, just are a bit more stoic and they don't
Hmm.
easily feel a lot of feelings. And like, right on, nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that.
There's
That's
nothing
great
wrong
as
with that.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that you
So
said that too. Feeling like what a gift it is to feel,
totally.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think tears are wonderful. I really
Oh,
do.
so do
So,
I. They're so
yeah.
cathartic. And also too like
Hmm.
all the range of emotion. Like that's why like I mean, I consider myself I have like big feelings. So that's why I
Hmm.
think too it often concerns me when people don't like it's like at the end of the day, and like I've thought about this a lot, so forgive me. Like, because I also have a background in marketing. And
Okay.
I'm like, what? And like, that's all about obviously psychology and urging people to buy. And the one thing I found in marketing is you're trying to get somebody to feel something by saying something or by
Hmm.
the way something looks to then have them buy
Hmm.
something. So it's like we walk through this world where we're all basically, I mean, in very simplest forms, chasing feelings, which are also fleeting.
Hmm.
They're not
Hmm.
always there for a long time. And also, too, one thing that I've learned from my experiences with my emotions is that, like, I cannot control them. I can just merely manage them,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah. 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 I mean, if you think about if you think about human behavior and you think about what is persuasive to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The three the three pillars of rhetoric, of persuasion, right, are ethos, pathos, logos, right? And so I come to you and I can appeal to you through my ethos, which is my credibility, which is why there are influencers and why there are movie stars selling face cream and why,
Mm-hmm.
that's ethos. There's logos, right, which is logical appeal. And
Yeah.
logical appeal is statistics, it's facts, it's science, it's studies, right? That appeals to the logical mind. But then there's pathos. And pathos is called pathetic appeal. And not in a pejorative sense of the word, but pathetic appeal is far and away the most effective form of
Yeah.
marketing
And
because
powerful.
we're using narrative and we're telling story. Testimony is part of pathetic appeal, pathos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, it really does come back down and around to the story, which I love. I love that we're interested in one another
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally. You know what I mean? And we're actually seeing one another as a reflection of the potentiality of self, right?
Yeah.
Right? But we're
Yep.
also seeing one another as a reflection of all of the shadow that we harbor as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. And so, I mean, in a weird way, it sort of gives the dynamic, the two sides of the coin of being a human, some light,
Yeah.
right? The shadow side and the sunny side.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say too, and I like to think, I'm sure you would appreciate this as a fellow marriage and family therapist. I also like to think of ourselves as like our core selves and then our parts. You know,
Mm,
we have our core self that when we're calm, connected, I forget the eight C's, forgive me. But that's what comes up when we feel safe. But then we have these protective parts that come out, these, exiles that but we're
right.
all this like, but the sum of the parts, I'm sorry, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So we're this whole being that is
Mm.
kind of this puzzle piece, this puzzle, if you will, or this constellation of different parts of ourselves and then ourself.
Right. And so then it goes back to where do you feel discomfort, right?
Mhm.
Where is there a feeling of an imbalance? And when I think of these parts, right? So I'm coming from again a psychodynamic lens.
Yeah, yeah,
And I know, Richard Schwartz and IFS and all that stuff. I've tipped my
yeah,
toes
yeah,
in it. And I think it's beautiful work. However,
yeah.
I think of things in terms of duality and I think of things in terms of opposites, right? And
Mm.
so, we can use the term complex, but individual comes in and they have this thing that's going on. And so the fundamental of Jungian theory, right, is the tension of the opposites, right? That there's two
Mhm.
poles. There's two, just like the eyes are dipoles, right? And I actually think that the tension of the opposites exists not just in psyche, but we see it in science, we see it in physics, we see it in male and female. We see, I mean, everything that exists, be it a thought pattern, has its opposite, right? So hang with me here for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah, no, no.
So
Oh, wait,
you have
I'm
a
all about too, like the
complex.
yin and the yang. I think, yeah, there is, just
So
in
you
every
have a
way.
complex, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you're experiencing, right? Underneath is something that is suppressed, repressed in the shadow. And so what we're doing then in the work, and we can call it whatever name we want to call it, but we are collapsing dualities, right? We are collapsing. So when you're talking about Richard Schwartz's work and you're talking about parts, there's the balancing act there as well. There's the allowing, there's the bringing that towards the center, right? Which is an allowing it to be, the removing of judgment from it, right?
Mhm.
Calling it in, calling it forth. And just that simple act of something that is otherwise, reprehensible or repulsive allows for it to, right, come closer to the center. And
Yeah.
so, in my opinion, what we're doing as a species is we are collapsing duality, right? We are coming more and more to a point of singularity, more and more to a defined sense of self, a capital S self, right? The fullest expression of our actualized self, right?
Yeah.
And so that dynamic is what we're always doing. And that's really, back to this brain science thing. That's the nature of what I'm doing and what neurotherapists are doing in terms of addressing that, okay, this person has too much of that. I'm going to give them this, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
bring them into the middle. You know what I mean?
Yes, balance it out. Yeah.
Balance it out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
will say too something and just like and maybe this is like it just I was gonna I think of like my emotions. Like I know that in my growth journey and my healing journey, I've definitely had to balance out my left brain and my right brain. You know what I mean? Like because I know that my feeling brain, my right brain, right? That's right, the right one, right? The right brain's feeling brain, correct? Right?
The right brain is the
Yeah, the right
feeling
brain.
brain. Yes, you got
So
that
I
right.
just know too that my that part of my brain reacts just so more just quickly than the left brain. It's
Mm,
just that reactive. But I've had to, for instance, I'll use an example. Like I find myself just I just want to help people. But I find that I have to, my that might be my first reaction. So if I see something going on, I'll be like, let me help them. But then my left brain catches up and then tells me, like, Danielle, is this really the right place for you to be doing it? Are you gonna be self-abandoning if you do that? Like, then I kind of compute the reasoning. So I've tried to flex
mm,
that muscle
mm.
or whatever that neural pathway is in my brain to like pause a little bit before knowing my right brain does react a little bit faster. I mean, just in general, I think our right brains react faster uh
Right.
as human beings, but for me, especially when it comes to something that like I'm passionate about or I think is valuable to me, I'm like, all right, you really have to pause because and think about this, whether it's gonna benefit you, whether it's the look at the situation because if I just reacted off of that like I want to help, I would be running myself ragged and would not have, anything in my cup to
Yeah.
have a full life.
Well, interestingly, I mean, kind of pulling on that same thread of, the one of the fundamentals of IFS, and so okay, so there's a homeless person on the street, right? Let's use
Yeah.
this example. And so
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
you say you say I want to help, right? I want to
Uh-huh.
help. Now, that's well and fine, right? However, there is the supposition that there's something that's wrong, right? That there's
Hmm.
something that's wrong and I need to stand and help this individual. And that's not always the case. In fact, I think what a lot of people actually need is acceptance, right? It's just sort of saying like, "What's up, man? What's your name?" You know what I mean? As opposed to like,
Actually, yeah, like a savior.
yeah, like, "Oh, here's a
Yeah.
banana,
Yeah.
let me give you some food,
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah. I
opposed to
want to
like,
nourish you. Yep. Yeah.
how's your day?" And
Yeah, they want to
so
just be acknowledged and seen.
right. And so when we want to do that, wherever that might be, and again, profession aside, because and acceptance in profession is also really important. You're sitting across from the person as opposed to trying to fix them. Experiencing them with them, being in their shoes with them,
Mhm.
I think is actually far more efficacious. But in trying to help a person who is out there in the world, extenuating circumstances barred, right? You see someone that
Yeah.
gets hit by a car and you're going to jump in and help, right? Like there are certain circumstances, but
Yeah.
think about what is it of you, right? Of us that we are projecting onto that person that we think needs salvation, right? Like
Hmm.
there's this awkward silence in a conversation, and then we might think that we have to fill the space with some
Yeah.
words so that we don't make that person uncomfortable. But what we're actually doing is we're helping ourselves not feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? So there's always this projective identification thing that's happening in the world, and it's an othering, right? It's a way of knowing oneself through a projection onto
Hmm.
others, which is again
Hmm.
all about the edification of the ego, right? This is about,
Hmm.
how do I know myself more? How do I become more identified, more edified through this process, right? Anyway, I could go on, but it's all really
No, no, I love
curious.
that. I love your perspective around that because me personally, I'm always looking to learn and grow. And I know you've mentioned like, self-actualization in this conversation and all this stuff. Like, I'm not, this is just me. Like, this is just my perspective. Like, I hopefully want to get to that level of self-mastery. Will I ever say, oh yeah, like no, like, a master of myself? No, I don't
Yeah,
think I'll
yeah,
ever
yeah.
get there because of like the field I chose, just because of the way I view life. But I do want to get to that, to a level of, I think I'm definitely past the self-discovery. I feel like I know who I am. But and I feel like I'm maybe like on the self-actualization stage.
I think we all are. I think
Yeah.
we all are,
Yeah, every day.
if you're, yeah, I mean, I think we're all moving up. I mean, granted, there's probably some sinusoidal, some regressive sinusoidal
Yeah.
waves, but yeah, no, I think we all are. I think we
And
all
at the
are.
end of
It's
the day, oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go
Well,
ahead.
what I was going to say is it's interesting in studies that have, pursued individuals who are very high level meditators, people that,
Mm.
really pour themselves into this craft and try to become, non-dual, right? Singular, is at a certain point, there's a reporting of things actually, you move out of the bliss state into almost more of a dystopian sort of
Mm.
space where yeah, because you realize in a way that actually nothing really matters and
Yeah.
nothing's really real. Like this is a figment of our imagination. There's nothing to strive for. And I know that just sounds so bleak, but I have a good friend who's a physician who he's in his 80s now, but
Oh,
he
wow.
became a really practiced meditator. And I actually got to look at his brain as he was in this like deep trance state. In fact, he meditated for 4 hours and then silently like walked over to the car. His wife drove him in silence to my lab. He silently walked in. We had a whole plan. I capped him up and he kept on meditating, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so interestingly, his data, he showed a slowing of his processing speed down into the theta range. So he had gotten himself into a trance-like state.
Okay.
But one of the things that he said to me, back to this original point, right, was he said, I'm so grateful that I didn't know as a young person what I know now.
Mm.
Because if I did, I wouldn't do anything. Like I wouldn't have
Yeah,
any
he would like there'd be no
motivation.
motivation.
There'd be
Yeah.
no motivation, right, to get up and go and do. And I thought that was a really interesting point.
Huh. Amazing what you can find. I will share with you, that's something I struggle with, like specifically meditation. I know we all have our different ways of doing things, but that's something like my mind is so active. Like I would love to do like a neurotherapy session to see my brain at certain points of the day, because to slow my brain down and be in that like deep, I don't think I've ever been in
Yeah,
like a deep
yeah.
trance meditative state before.
Yeah, yeah. And if you find your way there, it will be your own unique flavor. It will be its
Yep.
own thing, right? And, some people really meditation isn't their jam. Maybe
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
maybe
that's
it's like
true.
I love to ride bikes down hills really fast, and that makes
Yeah.
me feel alive. Like that can be meditation.
True. That is
So,
true. That is true. It's not just all sitting in silence and, being
yeah.
still. It could be, I always say to people, I feel like I have like meditative, maybe like moments in two places.
hmm
What the driving for some reason, because I do drive alone a lot. So it's like, I mean,
hmm
I don't have a lot of passengers in the car really ever. So I feel like that's a place where I can be with my own thoughts, and also the shower. I can like,
hmm
I mean,
hmm
but I feel like I can get in deep into thought when I'm just alone in the shower, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. So that's where Billy Joel came up with there's a song called In the Middle of the Night that he
Yeah,
sings
I
anyway,
love
it's a
that. Yeah,
hit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
And
he
I
came
know
up with
that.
that in the shower.
Oh, see,
And
yeah, shower thoughts. I love it.
shower thoughts. And so what's happening there is, there is there's a disengagement, there's a functional disengagement, right? So you're
Mm.
mentioning places where your system isn't actually processing any information, i.e., driving the car, in the
Yeah.
shower, and what's interesting in those spaces is there's an allowance. So there's an allowance of the movement of content if you believe in theories of the unconscious, or you can call it subconscious, but unconscious is a Jungian term, right? And that there's the unconscious and then there's the conscious, right? It's in those spaces that you're opening up the divide, you're opening up a bridge, right? That allows for the integration, for the movement, for the individuation, there it is,
I love it.
of that material up into waking state. And so egoic state, right? And so this is where we solve problems. This is where we come to our ahas, this is
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
we, right? The name of the song that we forgot comes to us,
Yup.
right? It's in those spaces of ease and
Yup.
relaxedness. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Tiff, this has
Yeah.
been just such an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much. You've like
My
opened
pleasure.
up my mind and my subconscious and my subconscious, hopefully, to a lot of different things. So thank you so much for being here.
All right, Danielle, thanks to you. Have a good
Yeah,
day. Appreciate
of
it.
course. And as of
Okay.
usual, everybody, you can find the Feeling and Healing podcast on YouTube as well as Apple Podcasts and Spotify.